Hello everyone, I'm back with another video. Just wanted to share some of my thoughts for a movie I recently watched, The Theory of Everything. And of course, this movie basically chronicles the relationship and eventual marriage between Jane and Stephen Hawking, the world-renowned physicist. So it really starts with them as students. They meet, hit it off. You know, things are off to a good start. But very early on in the relationship, Stephen Hawking begins having problems with mobility and things like that. And we learn really that he's been diagnosed with ALS, which is just unbelievably awful. So she's faced with that information, and you know, he kind of withdraws, and it's like, look, you know, really just kind of leave me alone type of thing. You know, you don't want to be a part of this. And his own father basically warns her that these changes are going to be brutal. But to her credit, she stays the course. She chooses to remain by his side. There are some interesting questions about that I'll explore later in the review. So she makes that decision and does not want to leave him. They will face this together. We see that they actually, over the course of time, they have, you know, they get married. They have 3 children. And, of course, he is very driven in his research. If you're like me, because I'm a fan of his work, I have his book, The Universe in a Nutshell, you're probably wondering, well, do they give enough time to his research and his breakthroughs and all of his work? And I would say the answer to that, I feel, is yes. Now, that is not the primary narrative for this film. Okay, as I said, it's really exploring the bond between Stephen and Jane. That's the heart of this film. However, they do sprinkle those moments where he's having a breakthrough, where he's researching a new theory, black holes, Hawking radiation, parts where his contemporaries are admiring his brilliance. There are moments where he, you know, presents his findings to a captive audience, and they cover that. But certainly that's not the main focus. But you see his ascension over time in the physics realm, and his notoriety increases. But the main focus is definitely on the relationship. One thing I've heard people say, and I've read comments by Jane herself in real life, I guess, in response to the movie after she watched it. Some have said that it doesn't fully capture just how taxing it was. And I have no doubt about that. But I think that's, you know, the story wasn't all about battling ALS. Really, they wanted to capture things beyond that. That was a big part of it. And we have scenes where Jane, off in isolation, after, say, something has happened, Stephen, you know, choking on his food or something like that, and there's all this stuff that has to be addressed, and there are moments where you can see her really just the weight of it, like, is this my life now? I mean, is this really all it is? But her devotion to him never falters. I found it to be remarkable. It was inspiring, obviously, because that type of connection and that level of devotion. You know, we live in a world now where people say so many things, and oftentimes they really don't mean it. There are so-called friends out here who can barely remember your birthday. And if they remember, they can't bother to wish you a happy birthday. All right? There are people who ask you for help, and you help them, oftentimes in very difficult situations. And that really doesn't register with them a week later. You know, I've helped people. I've been there for people. And I guarantee you, if I disappeared tomorrow, if the aliens from Independence Day took me off world, they just simply wouldn't care. They wouldn't notice. And so I found it very touching, very inspiring that this woman had such devotion. She put her own career on hold for him, and she was right there with him. And just this constant presence. And certainly you could say that Stephen Hawking, you could argue, you know, every time he had a major breakthrough later on, when the condition was upon him, you've got to give her credit for just helping him with that daily struggle. You know, you wake up to that nightmare every day of ALS, but you have this constant in your life, this woman whose love for you, whose devotion is just absolute. And so certainly she indirectly, you would have to say, contributed to a lot of his work simply by being a loving presence for him so that he could immerse himself in that. And of course, it's very inspiring to see how he handled it and just his perseverance. He had a life expectancy of 2 years. And the fact that, you know, you can basically outlive a lot of celebrities in real life, I mean, it's remarkable. And I think when you are facing really adverse or hellish conditions, I think everyone needs some type of anchor. You need something in your life, some pursuit, some major goal. Some people, it's something like going back to school. You know, you never finish school, you decide to go back. It's, you know, your hobbies, trying to start a business. There has to be something to occupy your mind, to distract you from whatever awful reality is upon you. And I have no doubt that Stephen's brilliance played a huge part in how he coped on a daily basis with ALS, and that he could escape into his research and into his theories and into the mathematical paradise inside of his mind. And I as I said, that I certainly, if you don't have something like that to kind of act as your anchor, I definitely feel that it will overwhelm you over time. So, but you know, it's interesting because I guess officially they finally parted ways, or there was an initial separation before the divorce, because he apparently cheated with his nurse. Now, I mean, it's amazing. There's a part in the film where, you know, she announces to a gentleman that she met, a musician named Jonathan, who actually became a very close friend of the family. And in real life, Jane is now married to Jonathan. And they apparently, you know, had a connection. There's a part where she announces to tell Jonathan that she's pregnant. And he's like, oh, wow. You know, it's like the guy who was bound to this chair in this state, he's, wow, okay. And of course, they actually make a point of that earlier in the film to try to let you know that, yeah, there's still some physical intimacy, because one of his friends is like, now, does it affect everything below the neck? So, but yeah, you know, clearly he enjoyed the company of his nurse that, you know, arrives later in the film. You know, has this strong admiration and all, and just, you know, he's just so brilliant, and just in the way that she interacts with him, you can tell he enjoys it. And listen, I mean, as I said, that coping with that would be such a miserable reality that, you know, who wouldn't like that attention? There's a part where he wins, he's got a subscription to Penthouse. He won that on a bet, and she kind of holds up the issue and shows it to him, and he, you know, types into the computer, because he's lost the use of his voice by this point. So when I say type, I mean he has a clicker. He could still, at that time, he could still click the button with his finger. And so the software allows him to compose sentences, and then a synthesizer actually handles the speech. But he says, you know, something like, you know, it's for a friend. And and Eddie really does an amazing job with this performance. But one thing I love was he captures the humor of Stephen Hawking. I mean, everybody has said, that he has a great sense of humor, and that over the years, even when he was struggling, battling ALS, he always maintained that great sense of humor. And I've read many accounts of that from a lot of different people, celebrities and colleagues and things like that. So, yeah, there's a part where I guess he's talking to his wife, Jane, and he's hesitant, but then he says that, through the synthesizer, that he wants his nurse to accompany him. Elaine wants her to accompany him to America, and the wife just starts to break down because I think she's starting to, she's connecting the dots at this point, and she basically just is like, I've loved you, and I've tried, and what's amazing, you really don't see Stephen Hawking cry throughout this film. There are, very blatant and displays of sadness and depression, which is completely which you would expect, but he really kind of holds it together in terms of tears. And when she starts talking to him that way, where I guess it's kind of sinking in, wow, is this happening, or am I about to lose this presence in my life? Yeah, he turns on the waterworks. I mean, the tears start flowing, and it has extra, I think, impact because it's the first time we truly see him succumb to sadness of that extent, where the tears are just flowing, and it's very effective, because he everything else he just kind of tried to withstand it as best he could. So that happens, but I'm sure, but there's still a connection there, and she's, I guess after that she's with Jonathan. I do find myself wondering, would she have, I can't say enough about her devotion, and she deserves to be as happy as she can possibly be in this world. But so I had some questions as I watched it. And one thing I wondered, this is a story of people. We're not talking about machines. We're not talking about, lizard men. The life expectancy was, say, 2 to 4 years. And I find myself wondering, when she knew what was coming, would she still, if someone could have said, well, here, look into this crystal ball, and you see here, this situation, you will endure this for 30 years. Would you still say, okay, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going to leave him? And I think that's an interesting question, because that's so above and beyond what anyone could expect. As I said, most people can't even take time to wish you a happy birthday. No one could fault her if she said, I think this is maybe too much for me. I don't believe that I can endure this. And in a case like that, what can you say? And then you wonder, so would she have stayed with him if he never had ALS, but she met someone else, met Jonathan? Because let's say, like they mentioned Einstein, if his relentless pursuit of groundbreaking understanding to be just the best possible physicist, you wonder if that devotion, the strain that, say, that would place on the marriage, because that's kind of hints at that in some things that I've read. You wonder if the marriage would have lasted even without, say, if there was no ALS, would she maybe have left because now you don't feel an obligation? I think at a certain point, the wife kind of gives way to the caregiver, that at a certain point it becomes hard to imagine leaving him because you look and you feel like you're leaving him in such an awful state. So let's say you never had that potential guilt weighing on you, then I think you have to ask the question, say, when she met Jonathan and they hit it off, or would things have been great? Would they have been doing things and taking trips and it still have been wonderful? Or, you know, you kind of get the sense that he became more and more consumed with his work, that I think she might have felt that he didn't quite give as much attention to the family. But again, I would argue that the work, the research, was probably a big part of what allowed him to offset the very taxing, just nightmarish feeling, I'm sure at times, of suffering ALS. But then, you know, in fairness, he could have cheated earlier. He could have been at a conference and someone, Dr. Hawking, I'm such a big fan of your work. I'd like to maybe let's, you know, have dinner and whatever. I mean, who knows, you know? So who knows, maybe if he was, you know, free to do whatever, who knows? But those are realities that never materialized. As it stands now, they had an amazing bond, and it was, I think it was a good movie. Now, you know, again, it's not just devoted to his research. So if that's what you desire, you know, you aren't going to find that here. But they do recognize that side of his life, and there are some great moments, you know, some eureka-type moments sprinkled throughout the film, and that's definitely a part of it. But it isn't the main narrative, as you would expect. And it does give a sense for what it's like, what this can do to someone, and what the toll it takes on your family and your spouse and your loved ones. But some would say it doesn't go into enough detail on that front, that it could be much more taxing, much more of just a daily struggle to cope with this. Again, I would say, of course, they weren't going to go but so far with that. You get the idea. You take it for what it is. You know, we live in an age of cynicism. I can be very cynical myself. It's kind of the lifeblood of the internet. But just watch it, and yeah, while there are times where it maybe gets the Disney treatment, if you will, it's there are certainly worse ways to spend your time than watching The Theory of Everything. So I hope you've enjoyed this review, and I will be posting more videos soon, more animations and things like that. And so we're also going to do another riddle video, and I'm going to do the artwork and stuff for that. We'll post more music. I mentioned that before. So if you enjoyed this, I'd appreciate it if you consider subscribing to my channel, and you know, that will provide the motivation to offset my laziness, thereby allowing me to make more content. So thanks so much for watching this. I put a piece of my artwork on the screen this time, so hopefully that wasn't, you know, the ugliest thing you've seen all day. And I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.